Okay, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. First, we're looking at my reading stats for January, and then going over all the books that I read in January, what I thought about them, and then all of my February reading plans, which is a lot. I am planning on buddy reading 6 books in February, plus all the other books I want to read. Also, I only read 7 books in January, so I have like more books planned for February, even though it's a shorter month. We'll see how that goes. First off, diving into my reading stats for January. I'm going to be looking down at my laptop here for these reading stats because that's where they are. So 5 of the books I read were on audiobook, 1 book was an ebook, and 1 book was a physical book. Next is the split between adult, middle grade, and young adult. I did read 3 young adult books, 2 adult books, and 2 middle grade books. Next is whether I was reading these books for the first time or whether I was rereading these books. I did reread 2 books in January. This one is whether or not I have read from the author previously. So this is split directly down the middle despite me reading 7 books because I read 2 books from Margaret Rogerson, so I'm only counting her once. So I read 6 different authors in January, even though I read 7 books, and then it's whether or not I've read this author in previous years or whether or not this was the first time I was reading this author. Next is genres. So I read 5 fantasy books, 1 nonfiction, and 1 debatably historical fiction book. So genre lines are kind of blurry. I generally try to put the books in the genre category that I feel like best represents the book or is like the primary genre of the book, but we definitely have books that can fit in multiple genres. So the book that I'm counting as historical fiction is often classified as a science fiction book, and that is Kindred by Octavia Butler. The thing is, this book has time travel in it, which I feel like is probably why it's classified as science fiction. And I'm pretty sure most of the books she writes are science fiction books, so like she's basically just a science fiction author. But I really felt like the thing that we were exploring in this book was history, not the science. We didn't really explore the time travel element very much at all. So that's why I feel comfortable putting this in historical fiction. But feel free to debate me in the comments. And the last stat that I'm keeping track of is page length. I am planning on putting this video out before I go over my stats for 2022 video. This is how I plan on tracking my page lengths going forward. This is different than how I've tracked it in previous years, but this just makes so much more sense to me. And I find it interesting to look at. Next, we will go over the 7 books that I read in January. Starting off with the first book I read this year was Kindred by Octavia Butler. I have such mixed feelings about this book because I was like very engaged. I read this book very fast because I was very engaged with the story and I needed to know what happened next. But the story also made me like very, very mad. And I know some people have said like if a book brings up strong emotion, then like it's an automatic 5-star. But like I kind of have negative emotion towards the book. I just can't justify giving it like a 5-star, but I'm also like very conflicted because, I mean, yeah, it did make me feel things strongly and I was very engaged with the story. Also, the thing that made me mad, like I can't really talk about without talking about spoilers. It's in my review on Goodreads. I can link my Goodreads review. It is under a spoiler tag. I'm pretty sure when you link reviews, it's still under a spoiler tag. So if you want to see that what made me mad part, I will have the review linked in the comments. Next book I read in January was Rebel, Brave, and Brutal. This is the 2nd book in the Winter, White, and Wicked duology. I really enjoyed the first book in this duology. I really like Shannon Dittimore's writing because I feel like the way that she writes emotion is very vivid, and I really enjoy like feeling that and like really feeling like what the character is feeling, and just like even her like the way she describes atmosphere in the story, I feel like is also somewhat emotional and like really helps depict the story. So the first book is about this girl growing up on this island the island is inhabited by the spirit of winter, and it's winter like year round, although it does go through like some seasonal changes. And our protagonist is friends with the spirit of winter. But throughout the story, she starts to realize that winter is actually kind of a malevolent presence on this island. And it's really her wrestling with that. The problem is that there was this like backdrop underlying corrupt government thread throughout book 1. But that is like the foremost thing in book 2. And in book 2, it is basically a rebels rising up against the government story. The problem is that was never the most compelling part of the story for me. So, like, while I still like the writing and like the emotional feel in book 2, I wasn't really captivated by the plot at all and was just kind of feeling meh about the story. The next book I read is a middle grade historical fantasy. It is called The Gilded Girl. So this is basically a world where people have, well, at least children have magic. And those who are affluent can go to school and learn how to cultivate their magic, and then there's going to be this like magical wind that comes through, and if you've learned how to cultivate your magic, you can use that wind to like continue to use your magic into adulthood. Whereas if you've like not cultivated your magic and you're not ready for when that wind comes, your magic will be snuffed and you won't have magic anymore into adulthood. So we're following a protagonist who starts out at this affluent school learning how to cultivate her magic. And then she quickly loses her fortune and basically has to work as a servant in the school. And then she starts conspiring with another servant at the school to cultivate their magic anyway, despite not having the privilege of going to classes and all of that. They just don't want to lose their magic. And it is kind of like, I guess, a classism struggle story. I wasn't super captivated by this story. I felt like it was very straightforward and mostly predictable. The thing is, I feel a little bit harsh criticizing it because this is a middle grade book, so like I am not the target audience for this book. So if I read it when I was younger, maybe I wouldn't find this story predictable. But I just found the plot like so straightforward that I don't know, like it was kind of fun, but it was kind of meh too. So that's my thoughts on The Gilded Girl. I read The Sorcery of Thorns next, but I'm going to skip that because I also read Mysteries of Thorn Manor by the end of the month. So I'm going to talk about both of those together. So we'll go to the next book that I read, which was The Barren Grounds. So this is a reread for me, and I really enjoy this book. This is a middle grade portal fantasy, but it's like contemporary setting plus fantasy. So this one was one that I classified as fantasy, but it is also one of those like somewhat cross genres. So this is about 2 Indigenous children in the foster care system in Canada, and they find a portal into a world where like the myths of their tribe come to life. The one child has been with his Indigenous family for much longer, and the other one doesn't really remember her family at all because she entered foster care whenever she was a baby. And it's really exploring both of them. One just feels like automatically at home in this new world, and the other one like really has to work through reconnecting to her roots. And it was a very beautiful story. I really enjoyed reading this the first time, and this time I will say I was slightly more disappointed because I just started noticing all the pop culture references in this book. I did not notice that the first time I read it. Sometimes pop culture references work for me, but like for the most part, if there's too many of them, and I felt like there was a lot in this book, they kind of stand out and are like jarring and take me out of the story. So I mean, I don't know what to say because I didn't even notice them the first time, but then this time I just felt like there was just so many of them. So I still enjoyed rereading it, and I plan on continuing the series. Next book I read was the only nonfiction book I read this month, which is How Space Works. If you are looking for an overview of our knowledge of space, I definitely recommend this book. It is very illustrated. It goes through basically a very good complete overview. It doesn't like go super duper in depth in like any one area, but it covers a lot of ground, and it makes it like very easy to understand because like there's illustrations and stuff that explain things. So I really enjoyed this because I didn't know a whole lot about outer space, and I felt like this really gave me a fairly good understanding, but like also not like super in depth that it's overwhelming. And finally, I will talk about A Sorcery of Thorns and Mysteries of Thorn Manor. These were probably my favorite books that I read this month. Sorcery of Thorns is a reread, so I read this more than a year ago. And here's the thing. I was kind of conflicted whenever I very first read Sorcery of Thorns because I love the characters and I love the world in this book, but the plot's kind of weak. And rereading it, I very much knew what to expect. So I was like prepared for that, and I was just ready to like fall in love with the characters and follow them on their journey and follow, you know, explore this world a little bit more and not really care about the plot as much because I kind of knew where it was going anyway, and I really think that helped. So in this book, our protagonist is a magical librarian who takes care of like magical artifacts and magical books, and she is honestly like most of the librarians are pretty suspicious of sorcerers because sorcerers derive their magic from being bonded to demons, which is one of the really interesting aspects of this story. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about Mystery of Thorn Manor a little bit while I'm talking about this. So the sorcerers have to bind themselves to a demon in order to perform magic. And this is like a mutually beneficial thing because whenever the sorcerers are doing this, they're basically bargaining away years of their life that the demon's going to feed on while he's providing them with like a magical source. The really interesting thing about this is the demons sometimes, like the demons are not trustworthy, and they sometimes benefit from like killing the sorcerer or harming other people around them, but they also like can't disobey direct orders from the sorcerer. And it's just really interesting dynamic. So our main sorcerer that we meet and then our demon that we meet in this book is really interesting because the demon actually seems like very nice and helpful and is ready to help you out in a pinch and is always there for you and seems very loyal and trustworthy. But every now and then his mask will slip and he's like not at all shy about it. He's like, no, I'm a vicious creature and I'm out for myself and I will harm you and kill you if I need to. And it's really interesting because it kind of gives you this like unsettling feeling around him. My problem with the Mysteries of Thorn Manor is he doesn't really let that mask slip at all in the book, so he just seems like a lot more, I guess, docile and nice and pleasant to be around, which I kind of miss that like unsettling feeling about him. Other than that, the Mysteries of Thorn Manor was a fantastic continuation. So it's not so much a continuation as it is a expanded epilogue of Sorcery of Thorns. It's not deep plot wise. It is mostly a continuation of Nathaniel and Elizabeth's relationship, which was really fun to explore. This entire book takes place in Thorn Manor, which is one of the ancient sorcerer households, which was very interesting because like previous generations of sorcerers have put magical spells on the house and they're like exploring the manor and finding out about some of these things. Like there's cursed objects, like a murderous dressing gown that is out to kill the current inhabitants of this house, which was really fun to read about. It really feels a little bit fan servicey just with like how many like fun ridiculous scenes there were. Like I don't mean ridiculous as in it doesn't make sense, but like murderous dressing gowns, you know? It works in this world. It feels almost like you're reading a fan fiction, but like this is totally canon. It was great. I enjoyed every second of it, aside from like my only complaint right now is like the demon wasn't quite as interesting. Yeah, it's a very short book. It's a novella. The plot, again, is not great, but I don't read these books for plots. I read it for the characters in the world. So definitely ended January on a high note because the last few books I read in January were great. I loved them. And now to talk about the very many books I plan on reading in February, despite February being an even shorter month than January. Actually, reading 7 books in January is like an unusually high number for me. I can read anywhere from like 2 to 5 books on average. So let's see if I can keep the motivation up in February. First and most important thing is I am hosting the Temeraire read-along starting in February. So the Temeraire series is 9 books. It is Napoleonic Wars with dragons, but it is mostly a relationship between a dragon and a dragon rider, and it is an absolute delight to read. So we are starting this the first full week of February, but you can join in at any time, and then we're reading a new book every 3 weeks. I will have, I'm pretty sure I already have this posted on my community tab, all the details, but I will put a link to it in the description. If I don't already have it posted there, I will post it, and you can see all the details for that. We will be chatting about that in my Discord. I'm also buddy reading a lot of other books in February, so let's go through them. The first book I'm buddy reading, and I'm currently reading this, is Moon of the Crusted Snow. I am reading this with cozy reader Kelly. I will have her channel linked in the description. She had a list of books asking if anyone wanted to buddy read them, and I wanted to buddy read a couple of them. So this is the first one we're starting with. This is about an indigenous community in Canada, and it's like a post-apocalyptic story. So I'm currently reading it, so we know a little bit about it. So we're following characters on this reservation, but we also have like characters from outside the reservation who come to it and then talk about things that are happening outside the reservation, as well as like how the tribe is dealing with the issues that they're facing on the reservation. So kind of a slow moving story at this point. I'm pretty early on in the story, and honestly the writing style I struggle with like a little bit because it's pretty like factual, this happened then that happened, but I'm also like kind of interested in what's going to happen next. So I am enjoying that one, at least somewhat. Other book I'm currently reading, which I'm not buddy reading with anyone, I'm just reading it, is The Golden Compass. I am planning on finishing this one in February. I'm about 120 pages into it, and I also have kind of conflicted feelings. Maybe I'm just in a mood right now where like all books I'm like somewhat enjoying, but also like somewhat bored by, because like that's how I feel about this one. Because like sometimes I'm really engaged and sometimes I'm just like, we're standing around talking and that's all that's happening. I don't know. I'm in a mood right now, I guess. But I am enjoying it for the most part, and I'm going to continue reading it. Hopefully I will like find books I'm just loving every second of, but we'll see. Next book I'm buddy reading, I'm in the group on Instagram called the Middle Grade Groupies, and this is like the first time, well, I read the Barren Grounds with them. That was their January book, and I like joined in January like while they were reading that, and the February book is Flight of the Puffin, which I don't really know much about, but I'm going to read it. Middle Grade Groupies also has a spin-off group, which is like for Newbery winners and honor books, and our February group read is Feathers. I wanted to read more of the Newbery books, so I feel like this is a great opportunity to do that. Next buddy read is with the Reading Corner group. I'm in way too many like book club groups, and it's a lot to keep up with, but I enjoy it. So the next buddy read is with the Reading Corner, and I will have that Discord linked in the description. And for February, we are reading Legends and Lattes, which I've already read, and I absolutely love this book, and I'm looking forward to rereading it and discussing it with everyone in the group. The other book that I'm buddy reading is The Poppy War, with like the Science Fiction and Fantasy Monthly Book Club, I'm pretty sure is the name of it. And we're reading The Poppy War in February and then Babel in March, which I am looking forward to Babel even more than The Poppy War. But I figured I'd give The Poppy War a go and see if I like it or not. How many buddy reads? Is there any others? I don't think so. The other potential buddy read for February, I'm pretty sure it's February, also with cozy reader Kelly, is Year of the Witching. I honestly don't remember that much about this book, but I know she mentioned it in her video and I looked it up and I was like, I want to read that. So I put it on hold at my library and it came in already. So hoping to start that one soon. Looks really interesting. Other books I'm planning on reading in February is continuing on with the Mistaway saga. So I talked about the Barren Grounds, and then the next book in that saga is The Great Bear. I do already have that audiobook out from my library, and I will be reading that soon. Other books I plan for sure to read in February, they're just reading on my own. Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters is a book I first read as a young person. And I really think we only like got it from the library and read it once, and it's like a book that stayed with me, and I was like, I must get that book out again. And then I have reread it since then, and I just plan on doing it again. So this is one of my favorite picture books. It is an African folktale, and it's also kind of like an African version of the Cinderella story. I mean, it's about being kind, and like true beauty is through kindness, and it's a really cool story. And I love it, and I recommend it to like anyone, even though it's a picture book. I think it's good for adults too. Next one I plan on reading is Born on the Water. This was one I heard Ashley from Bookish Realm talk about like probably a year ago, and I still haven't read it, and I put a hold on it at my library because I'm like, I'm gonna finally read this. This is also a picture book. I'm not usually a picture book person, but I guess it's the month to do that. Next one I plan for sure to read in February, if I have time, because I'm reading so many other things, is Raybearer. So this is a young adult fantasy book that I started last year, and then the audiobook went back to the library before I could finish it, and I was loving it. And I am absolutely finishing it this time, and hopefully reading the sequel too. So those are all the books that I'm really trying to read in February. There might be some other ones that I also read in February. We'll see. And hopefully I can get all of these. And I didn't count how many books that were. I just know there were a lot. But I'm like super excited about all of them. So those are my February plans. Let me know what your February plans are and what your favorite book was from January and all of the things. Just chat with me in the comments. And join in the Temeraire read-along on my Discord, which is also linked in the description. And I hope you have a great day. Happy reading!